Hi everyone, it's been a minute since I've done a live. I'm excited to be inviting Marie Beecham this morning to chat to us. I'm just going to pin the topic so we know what we're doing. Pin comment. Okay, let me just find her. There we go. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. How are
I
you?
am I am doing very well. How are
Okay,
you?
good. I'm good, thank you. I'm very good. Just want to introduce, this is Marie Beecham. I'll also let you introduce yourself a little bit, but we're going to be talking about social justice and anti-racism. And yeah, I'd love to hear where you are, where you're calling from, if that's interesting to the story, whatever you feel like for your introduction.
Yeah, so I'm Marie Beecham, and I'm calling from the Midwest of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, how I got here or in this space is I started a social media account about first like low waste swaps, then about more holistic sustainability, then climate justice, and now racial justice thrown in there. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of how I got to this space.
Great. Yeah, I think that's also, I mean, when I first started following you, you were Waste Free Marie. So I'd love to hear about sort of how that came about, sort of what led you to start that, and also what then led you to just be your full name of Marie
Yeah,
on social media, even though sometimes that means nothing. Sometimes it does to your story.
absolutely. So yeah, I started out as Waste Free Marie because it rhymed. Um,
That's
but I started learning about this documentary, which is a fantastic documentary about fast fashion and the fast fashion industry. And it was really shocking to me because at the time I was like loving fast fashion and I had no idea that there was so much injustice in the fast fashion industry. And that's sort of what led me into the sustainability realm. And it was information that I hadn't known. And I couldn't believe that me, a person who was passionate about social justice and advocacy,
mm-hmm.
that I didn't know how my own consumption played a role in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I created Waste Free Marie to share what I was learning with other people. And it was always with the idea of like, it's not about doing things perfectly, it's about making progress. So that's where I started. And then as I continued to learn more and more, I started to sort of shift my thinking to, while I think it's empowering for individuals to take action and to do what you can, I never want the bulk of the responsibility to fall on individual people rather than the corrupt industry practices.
Mm-hmm.
So then as that started to shift and thinking that industry should take more responsibility while we as individuals can also take responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
then I started to sort of move away from waste free. And then as I started to share all of my passions, I didn't want to put myself in a box with any sort of label.
Mm-hmm.
And I stepped into my name, which is
Yeah.
the best title to hold, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't I think you step into your name and you realize that you don't need to necessarily like have this particular solid identity or like thing that you're wearing, I think, because it's obviously changes. And I think that's what's interesting. I found like, through my life have already changed quite massively. My interests, even from like being in front of the camera to then being behind the camera and wanting nothing to do with kind of performance. And so, yeah, it's cool to, I think, allow yourself for change without necessarily like explanation apart
Yeah.
from for yourself. Um, I also, so on your website, you note that you are not just a resource, but as well an activist, an educator, and a whole person. And I thought that was really beautifully written, the way that you highlighted that. And I wondered if you could share why you highlighted that, and if that is because of experience of being treated as such as a resource.
Yeah, that is something that I think I was putting that expectation on myself to be like a resource, to be like a
Mm-hmm.
machine, to just churn out useful things for other people. And I think we put that expectation on others. Like we see people's worth and how they can serve us. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's how humans are made to operate. You know, we should find our worth in just who we are and what we love and things like that, rather than the service we provide to people. Because once I started to feel like people were demanding so much of me, if you think of yourself as you owe it to everybody, then it was exhausting. It was draining. And I wasn't setting up the right boundaries, and I wasn't pacing myself right. And throughout this time, I've learned that you can help people best when you are also setting proper boundaries and setting up those clear expectations that, like, you are a whole person with needs, who needs like the right pacing. And I love the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, because so I think with a lot of people, they're seen as like resources, and especially Black women and their role in society. So I think that's a good thing for everybody to hold, that we're all people, you know?
Yeah. And like looking out for, you know, I think it's true, the saying of like having that, not being able to feed from an empty cup, but I think too, sometimes we need to like empty for ourselves too. I think, you know, just in terms of like, we can be holding so much of other people's needs and expectations, and not like have that chance to kind of empty out and like remember why we're doing this in the first place, or like why we're passionate in the first place of being an educator like you are. I think otherwise sometimes the frustration can come around, and you're sort of like, why am I doing this, and why am I here online and everything. So I think it's important to like, put yourself first in moments. Next question is sort of similar to how you touched on sort of the stereotype of Black women being a resource and of kind of knowledge and education, and often maybe asked and given expectations that they shouldn't be put in the position to do. So my next question was, why is it necessary that we all do our own anti-racism work and not rely on our Black friends, colleagues, community to sort of teach us or share with us their experiences, or sort of make us understand the situation? And why is it important that it's our responsibility essentially, and we shouldn't rely on people like you to ask you, even though I know I'm asking you this now and this is what this conversation's about.
And I think it's a fine line, because I know it confuses people when me, an anti-racism educator, is saying, don't expect Black people to educate you with anti-racism. But the distinction, the really important distinction, is I choose when to speak and I choose when to educate, and that's up to me, and it's within the boundaries that I set, and it's my decision. But in a lot of situations, the issue comes with the expectation, and when the Black person is not given any sort of say, and that expectation ties back to white supremacy and the idea that Black people are here to serve white people. So there's a difference between me deciding to have a conversation such as this one, or deciding to write something, versus when people come into my DMs at all hours of every day to expect teaching on this specific situation. Or a real life situation might be, you know, if a Black person decides to share about their experience in a conversation about race and racism, versus if a Black person's going about their life and someone decides to sort of throw that on them and take them by surprise with that, and expect that they'll be able to do that at the drop of a hat. Because, you know, with any sort of discrimination or thing that can be traumatic, like racial discrimination, it's very seldom that we expect the people who are affected most to bear the burden and carry the weight. But I don't know why it is that we expect victims of racism to be able to at any time talk about it. And I think it might be that people don't understand how much racism impacts people. Like, they don't understand the weight that it bears, because if they did, then they wouldn't discuss it so flippantly. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think, you know, how you're saying with boundaries, I imagine that too, you know, the kind of great, there's obviously so many great things about social media we're having this conversation, but I think it does obviously open up kind of this expectation or assumption that people kind of have your time and that they can sort of air their questions to you in a moment where you haven't set up the boundary, or like that you haven't given them the sort of ability to do so. And do you find, I mean, this is kind of a question I was going to ask you later, but do you find that difficult, that sort of balance between having this online presence and an offline presence, and how our behavior, I feel like in my experience, sometimes from being kind of in the public eye or having a subject that people are particularly interested about, it kind of gives this like open book slightly to talk about it at all times of the day kind of thing. And do you find that challenging on like on social media online?
Yeah, I think definitely a challenge of social media is that it could be argued that we're a little bit overconnected. I mean, like with especially the boundary of time, you know, with any given thing that you might commit to, the expectation is that would be like 9 to 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
But in social media, I'll be getting messages or comments or whatever, like through all hours of the night. And not that I'm checking then, but but I think that social media does present a whole host of challenges that are difficult in a different way than in person, face-to-face conversations happen. And one of those is with the overconnectedness. I think another real issue is how nuance can be lost, and how every time maybe an issue is presented, the immediate response is, well, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Rather than first like slowing down to understand the depth of the issue itself, you know? So like one thing I always think of is like, if someone came into a doctor and was like, oh, I'm having trouble walking, the doctor wouldn't be like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. You're going to get a cast. We're going to do this. We're going to do surgery. No, the doctor would take a little bit more time to like to figure out the issue before they would diagnose it. So I think with social media, it's all about that hurry and that quickness rather than full, slow understanding.
Yeah, definitely. And how much, you know, by just pausing in that moment, like for a second, you can allow time to actually empathize and to, for a moment, attempt to understand what someone else's story is like, what someone else's identity means for them, and their history and experience is, because they're all just so different. And I think I was watching, I don't know if you've watched the new Steve McQueen show that started, Small Acts. That's the first episode was called Mangrove, and it talks about this really kind of big case of 9 Black people within London that were put to trial for something that they, you know, it was completely sort of, it was basically police brutality coming into this restaurant space, and they all went on trial, and the performance in it is just brilliant. And I feel like it's the only real TV show that or story that I've truly watched that I feel like has looked at racism within the UK in a really great and visceral way. And I think in moments where these characters had to sort of not react and swallow the experience that was happening to them, because obviously if they reacted, they would then be, you know, prosecuted further and treated with more violence. And I think just watching that, like, oppression of opinion, like they couldn't react in that situation they were in, made me just really take into account how much freedom I can have as a white person to be quite quick and reactive and maybe not seek necessarily repercussions for that. And I think it was just really interestingly and well told, that like just freedom of opinion, which I think over time in social media we all have so much like space to air our opinions, but I think like not seeing that, how like the cause and effect was so visceral. Yeah, I think online it can be like, yeah, people just like quickly giving their opinions without a moment like realize for the repercussions of things. But yeah, I'd recommend that show if anyone hasn't seen it. It just started. I think each story is standalone story, but it's like a 5 or 6 part. Same director who did 12 Years a Slave.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So my next question was, are there sort of like frustrations or walls that come up for you when you are trying to share information or educate around a certain topic? Like, is there is this something that people seem to get sort of like stuck on, I guess, in terms of just like getting past kind of quite deep rooted understandings of situations?
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. Number one is there's always some issue with the delivery. People really get stuck on whether you didn't choose the right words, or maybe they didn't appreciate your tone, or maybe, and I think that's a real issue, because I think it's that will always be a great way to stop forward progress, is to take issue with any form of delivery. And okay, three things. So that's the first one, the delivery. The second thing is like I call it like good, better, best. A lot of people think that something is either great or it's horrible. And if I share something and people think I'm not passionate enough, or maybe I care a little bit too much, then they say, well, we're in complete disagreement because we only agree about 85% of things. And I find that that's a real issue, where people, especially white people, will say, I agree with you for 90%, but that other 10% I can't get past. So I guess we disagree. And I think that's a really polarizing way to think. So I like to think of, there is good, better, best. You know, you can say, we do agree, and I think this would be better, or we do agree, and I think that might be, and rather than taking those opposite sides, but saying, you know, we're on the same page, we have the same goals in mind. And then the other thing that comes to mind is just the idea that people don't like to, and this is a completely human thing, people don't like to be told that they're doing something wrong when they haven't been doing anything at all. Like, so just like the idea that, you know, you're finding out, oh, you've been privileged, or, oh, you have all these benefits, or something like that. That's a real rut for people, to be blamed or to be told that they're guilty of something. So the issue with that there is that will become a real sticking point if you don't view if you center yourself. If you think it's about making you feel better, then that will become a huge sticking point. I can hear you.
I feel like I've lost Marie. We'll wait until she connects. Is everyone still there? I don't know if I'm the only one disconnected.
Hello.
Okay, people are still here. I'm just going to wait if Marie reconnects, unless it's me with the internet problem, but we'll see. Doo-doo. Can people still see me? Oh, you're still there. Okay, thank you for, if people are still there. I'm still waiting for Marie to reconnect. I'm hoping Audible is here. I'm frozen. Oh God.
Hello, I can hear you now. Mhm.
Okay, my next
Right.
question was on the flip side of this, some positive stuff of, is there some experience with people or the planet that brings you joy, whether or not that's complete a solo experience you like to do or things you like to do with others?
Absolutely. I love being in nature. I love going on walks. I spend at least 2 hours on walks every day, and that's saying a lot because where I live it's like 20 degrees, and I still insist on spending so much time outside. Um, and I think that nature brings people together in, like in a really beautiful way because I think no matter where your interests lie, we all we all have so much. Nature like reminds us of the ways that we're similar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my dream, I like I said, I live in the Midwest, so I have not seen the ocean for my entire life. So I'm looking forward to seeing the ocean someday. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I do get a lot of is I visit the mountains a lot. So I absolutely love hiking. I absolutely love standing on a mountain. I like to take the trails that are unpopular and just thinking like of how much space, like how big of a slice of the earth I get in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that the next group is so far away and just feeling so overwhelmingly grateful for that slice of our beautiful planet that I get in that moment.
Yeah, it's definitely a humbling, always experience stepping into it, or even just realizing that we are it. I think that's what's the best thing is we've had this real disconnect between ourselves and now what we call nature.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like I feel like that's such a interesting, huge topic that I am so more drawn to. That how do you kind of rekindle that relationship again that has been taught to us to disconnect from it and see nature as a resource, which we shouldn't, and instead something that we kind of belong to. It doesn't belong to us, kind of thing. So yeah, that's lovely to hear. I very much echo that. That's where my joy is, within natural environments and outside of cities and phones and all those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My next question we kind of actually already answered, which is the social media stuff. So I'll jump on to the next one, which is, um, we obviously this year have experienced a huge kind of melting pot of not only obviously a pandemic we're in, but the huge call for justice of the lives of Black people through Black Lives Matter movement, through protests that have happened across the globe. But now, naturally, as news always kind of fades from the front headlines and our feeds, I wondered, how do we make sure that we keep this at the forefront of our minds, and just because it's gone from the headlines, how do we commit to caring and showing up, not just kind of sort of reposting in that moment, but how do we continue our anti-racism work and make sure that it exists on and offline. And I think also it's interesting to bring up how we to curate our feeds, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
like the news we decide to tune into, and how sometimes that can maybe make sometimes a bit of an echo chamber of potentially like what we look at and what we assume to be like the collective experience.
Absolutely. So when it comes to how we do curate our own news, I completely agree. And I think that that can lead to a lot of issues, because I found myself in a place where I was saying, I absolutely cannot fathom how someone would disagree with me. I can't fathom how someone would reasonably think the opposite of me. And that's when I knew I was too far gone. So I made it my mission to read books that were written by people who I knew I didn't really agree with, to give them the benefit of the doubt and to fully understand where they're coming from. Because if you're at the point where you can't understand where someone else is coming from, then that will lead to so much frustration and so much division, rather than understanding that we all have people's best interest in mind, and we just have different perspectives. So that's been really helpful for me in understanding that good people can hold different opinions. And then you said, what was the first part of that?
Oh, just how we kind of, you know, whilst the headlines are no longer the kind of the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on, that protest of kind of justice, liberation is still very much happening and needing to be happen. But how do we
my friends have done one of my favorite things, which is they found guides online, which to my understanding is essentially like a spreadsheet document. And it's a daily, like people use habit trackers, and for them it's like an anti-racism habit tracker, where there's a section for things I've noticed today, something I read today, something I said today, something like I acted, and there's I think 7 categories, and each day they fill out 3 categories of how have I been doing anti-racism work today, whether it's been learning from someone, or learning from a video, or reading a book, or saying something, or being involved in my community. And that's been a really great way for them to hold themselves accountable and hold each other accountable. And they just found that by Googling online, looking for how do I keep up the anti-racism work even once the headlines have passed. So I think
that's a great resource. And I think also just check how there are so many ways to show up, whether or not that's just your own noticing your reactions, your nuances, to actively education, to it shows up in so many different ways. And I think even in ways, for me, it showed up just when you look at the people that you know, with my projects, every project I'm working with different people, so it's also just noticing, you know, where that really shows up, that disproportionate, you know, within the film industry. I mean, it's an incredibly white dominated industry, and taking it upon yourself to actively, slowly, in your own small way, try to shift that by making a conscious effort to include and hire more Black, brown people, and Indigenous people. I think knowing that I have the control to work with different people as it goes, it's not always the case. I think it's also so important often. I mean, I know we're not necessarily all at work or within our schools or different things, but I think they are systems within themselves. I mean, the whole world is built by systems, a lot that don't particularly work. And I find when you belong to somewhere like a workspace or a school or a specific industry, I think it's so important to share that kind of story and concern with your collective. I mean, at the beginning, you spoke a little bit about how it can't all be about the individual kind of lifting all of these things up, but instead about these bigger foundation systems that have that more power really to make big changes, whether that's the company that you love to buy your, I don't know, toothbrush from, or your clothing from, whatever that may be. It's like checking that they represent your values too, I think is really important, because I think obviously so many brands have stepped onto different topics, and you kind of want to make sure, are they really truly, like, is this filtering down through their workplace of their representation or their kind of empathy and care. It's definitely been a year for me to really seek transparency, I think.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point too, that there are a lot of issues within different industries, and I think it's so important just to simplify. I know I've been bringing up big concepts about all these different things you can do, but really we each hold the most power in our own sphere of influence. And I think bringing that work into whatever it is that your existing passions are, I think that's where it goes, whether it's having a conversation at the dinner table, or whether you're in the film industry or the fashion industry, or you're in journalism or whatever it is, focusing in on your specialty and making the changes and seeking reform in whatever industry that you specialize in, because that makes things make a lot more sense, and it helps you to maximize your impact because you have an understanding of that space that other people don't have.
Definitely an understanding and a closeness to it, and perhaps also passion for that because it relates to your story, because otherwise it's a huge topic that sometimes can be often overwhelming, and therefore you can kind of get stuck and then feel like you have no impact anyway, so you don't do anything because it's overwhelming. And I think, that's why I often think about when people kind of beginning to change or look at their environmental impact, it's like you cannot, radically shift your entire life, but what is one small department within your life that you'd like to begin to shift, to sort of reconnect and see some sense of, cause and effect. I would love to know. I mean, I think everyone should obviously go and see all the great videos and resources of education that you have in your own way, provided with boundaries, as we have said, on your own sort of time and interest on your page. So I really inspire and invite people to check everything that you've done out on your page. I've definitely found a lot of sort of help and knowledge, and just kind of like open my eyes to your story. And I would love, just before we go, to just touch a little bit on like how can we help you beyond following you and your and this conversation. Like how do we, in relation to you, show up for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so refreshing and just so enjoyable.
Good, thank you. It's been great.
I think that the best way to show up is sort of like I said, not just fighting against bad things, but fighting for good things. I'm a firm believer in that. Angela Davis speaks about that a lot. And I think that the ultimate goal is for us to make more good, and more good in the world. So whatever it is that you're passionate about or you're involved in, or that your job is, to bring more good in that and to fight for the good in that situation. And if you're looking for more learning or involvement, or to engage with a great organization, I always share that my favorite one is Equal Justice Initiative. And that's a great place to start with learning at eji.org, because they have a lot of resources on where my core passion is when it comes to the reform of the mass incarceration systems and fighting for justice in our criminal justice system.
Great.
So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. I'll look them up too. EJI, is that right? Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for tuning in. And I'm obviously will post this to my page for people who couldn't watch it live. But I wish you well, and I hope one day we can all move around and we meet in person outside of this. But I'm pleased that we had this opportunity. So thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marie. Bye-bye.